Harry, Ron, and Hermione ran forwards to help. Jets of light flew in every direction, and the man dueling Percy backed off fast. Then his hood slipped, and they saw a high forehead and streaked hair. "Hello, Minister!" bellowed Percy, sending a neat jank straight at Thickness, who dropped his wand and clawed at the front of his robes, apparently in awful discomfort. "Did I mention I'm resigning?" "You're joking, Pers!" shouted Fred, as the Death Eater he was battling collapsed under the weight of 3 separate stunning spells. Thickness had fallen to the ground with tiny spikes erupting all over him. He seemed to be turning into some form of sea urchin. Fred looked at Percy with glee. "You actually are joking, Pers. I don't think I've heard you joke since you were—" The air exploded. They had been grouped together, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, Fred and Percy, and the 2 Death Eaters at their feet, one stunned, the other transfigured, and in that fragment of a moment, when danger seemed temporarily at bay, the world was rent apart. Harry felt himself flying through the air, and all he could do was hold as tightly as possible to that thin stick of wood that was his one and only weapon, and shield his head in his arms. He heard the screams and yells of his companions without a hope of knowing what had happened to them. And then the world resolved itself into pain and semi-darkness. He was half buried in the wreckage of a corridor that had been subjected to a terrible attack. Cold air told him that the side of the castle had been blown away, and hot stickiness on his cheek told him that he was bleeding copiously. Then he heard a terrible cry that pulled at his insides, that expressed agony of a kind neither flame nor curse could cause, and he stood up, swaying. More frightened than he had been that day, more frightened, perhaps, than he had been in his life. And Hermione was struggling to her feet in the wreckage, and 3 red-headed men were grouped on the ground where the wall had blasted apart. Harry grabbed Hermione's hand as they staggered and stumbled over stone and wood. "No! No! No!" Someone was shouting. "No! Fred! No!" And Percy was shaking his brother, and Ron was kneeling beside them, and Fred's eyes stared without seeing, the ghost of his last laugh still etched upon his face.